A proposed law in Minnesota would deny landlords the ability to reject tenants with pending eviction actions. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. All right, so I have an interesting article for you today, and it's coming out of the state of Minnesota. I've talked about all of the nonsense, the ridiculous anti-landlord laws that they proposed up in Minnesota in the recent past, and it's getting ridiculous, okay? It's like they want to be part of the West Coast or the East Coast, okay? They want to join up with New York State or California and go into the ridiculous anti-landlord, anti-property property rights legislation that these states have been, just well known for in the recent past. So right now they're proposing a law that would make it so that landlords couldn't turn down tenant applications based on pending evictions. Now think about that for a second. You have a tenant who is in the middle of an eviction fight, right? They might not have an order of eviction yet, and you, as a landlord, you would no longer have the ability to say, hey, I don't want to take this tenant who is fighting against an eviction right now. Okay, that is a good indicator right there. They're not a good tenant for you. They're fighting an eviction case right now, and they have a pending eviction case. You're like, I don't even want to deal with that nonsense, but they're like, you must deal with this. You must take this tenant who isn't paying their rent, most likely, and put them up in your property. That's what they want you to do. And that's not the only change. There's a bunch of ridiculous nonsense in the proposed laws, okay? They want to make changes to the landlord-tenant law to basically make it so that nobody wants to be a landlord. And it's not actually going to help it's not going to make housing more affordable or more available to tenants who need it. It's not going to do anything other than put a huge burden, especially on small mom and pop landlords. Okay, that's the problem with all these laws. They put huge amount of burden on small landlords. They put a huge burden on all landlords. If you're huge as well, you could be a landlord with 100,000 units, but if you are not able to collect the rent from the tenants you're putting up in your property, you're not going to make any money. And so you're discouraging people from wanting to be landlords because they have to deal with this nonsense. That's the truth. So yeah, if you think that these laws are actually going to help things, you're dead wrong. Just like the rent control that they passed up in St. Paul, there's going to be a ton of unintended consequences that will eventually result in less affordable housing, more expensive housing of the housing that's left, and people still wondering, well, why didn't this fix anything? Why didn't this fix anything? Because you're dumb. And you never talk to the actual people, the landlords who were providing the housing, to figure out why their plan would not work. So before I get into the article, go ahead, hit the like, subscribe button, and leave a comment down below, and let me know what you think. Do you believe that a law that prohibits landlords from turning down the applications for people who have pending evictions, do you think that's actually going to help people remain housed? Do you think that's going to help make housing more affordable? Do you think this is actually going to somehow help tenants who, through no fault of their own, ended up in the eviction process? Do you think this is going to help anything? Other than, you're going to have landlords like me who own one house or a few homes, right? And they might not be able to keep track of the law. They're going to turn down that tenant, and then they're going to get sued, not even knowing what the law was, because they change these laws so often. Anyway, let's get into this article. This article is coming from the Minnesota Senate Republicans.com, and it says, Democrats' partisan landlord-tenant bill fails to tackle soaring rent prices. Now, this is an extremely partisan article here, okay? This is, obviously we're talking about, Republicans versus Democrats, right? But they do have some of the details of the law that they are trying to pass up in Minnesota in this article. So you decide on your own what you think of this whole nonsense, but keep in mind which party is actually fighting for property rights, which party is fighting for landlords' rights, and which party is taking rights away, which party is trying to tax us more, which, it's obvious which one, okay? So yeah, I'm going to be reading from this site regardless. The Minnesota Senate on Friday approved a package of partisan changes to landlord-tenant law that are poised to make housing more expensive for renters and create significant burdens for landlords. The Landlord-Tenant Conference Report is the product of an agreement between Democrat, House, and Senate negotiators on SF 3492. The Landlord-Tenant Bill, the Senate passed by an overwhelmingly partisan vote in April. Senator Eric Lucero, a Republican from St. Michael, the lead Republican on the Senate's Housing and Homelessness Prevention Committee, issued the following statement sharply criticizing the misplaced priorities in the bill. And now, they're going to go over the statement by this senator here, but, when it comes to these sort of issues, it becomes very partisan because one party, they believe in socialism. They believe that the government should be owning all the housing or controlling all the prices and controlling everything, and they believe that that alone is the only way to make sure that things remain affordable, that that people can afford things, right? And the truth of the matter is their meddling hands actually cause greater problems, and we've seen this in places like New York. We've seen this in places like San Francisco, where housing prices are sky high in spite of the fact that they have rent control laws in place, in spite of the fact that they have extremely strong tenant protections. Okay, why are the housing prices so high if that's the case? Because the only people who build there, the only people who offer their properties out for rent, if they are looking to make a huge profit off of them, so they are jumping through hoops, they are building only luxury housing, they are they're not building new affordable housing in these places. They're not building even middle income housing in these places because there's no money in it due to all the regulations that they put in place. And then meanwhile, the people who do have the golden ticket, the rent controlled unit for super cheap, right? Places are falling apart. They're not getting updated. A lot of the capital expenditures are being delayed for extremely long amounts of time because there's no profit in actually fixing these places up to have modern amenities. And, I've talked about this issue too many times, but, you can see this in real time in other cities, yet, they still try to pass these dumb laws in new places. The cost of housing in Minnesota is dramatically more expensive than all surrounding states. Unfortunately, the Democrat majority has put virtually zero effort into addressing the root causes of expensive housing in Minnesota. Instead of encouraging more home ownership, preserving naturally occurring affordable housing, and developing additional rental properties, Democrats took an adversarial approach to the landlord-tenant relationship that erodes private property rights and jeopardizes the safety of everyone who lives in multifamily housing. More should have been done to increase the supply of affordable housing options. Democrats failed to deliver once again. Yeah, it would be so easy. Okay, Minnesota is not exactly a state that is extremely densely populated. There is a ton of land to build on. What we need to do is remove government regulations that are making it hard or extremely expensive to develop that land. Okay, that's what the problem is. The reason that housing costs so much now is because it costs so much in permits, it costs so much in, the amount of time that you have to wait around to get approval. You have to build up to certain standards. You have to have certain yard sizes. You got to have all these hoops you got to jump through. You got to, you can't do this because this, and it's stupid. It's absolutely stupid. I talk about how if they allowed more trailer parks, mobile home parks to be built, that would solve a lot of the affordable housing problem, because then you would have people, they would have an option of being able to move into mobile homes instead of trying to move into fully built out single family homes, which cost way more to build. Okay, now it still won't be super cheap, and for the super duper poor people who truly are needy, there might be an argument that, hey, the government could step in and provide housing because this person is disabled, unable to work. Okay, that would be the only argument that even I would say, okay, there might be a good argument for that. But here's the thing. A lot of the housing that they are building right now for low-income people, it isn't for people who are unable to work. It is people who are in bad circumstances due to their own actions. And so that's part of the reason why I'm like, hey, you know what? These people, they don't need government subsidized housing. They just need cheaper housing, and the government needs to step the heck out of the way okay, so that we can actually provide that cheaper housing. But anyway, let's talk about this law they're passing up in Minnesota, or not passing, but attempting to pass. So, notable provisions, and here we're going to get into the bad stuff. The bill mandates that landlords accept alternative IDs like ITINs and prohibits denying rental applications based on pending eviction actions, making it exceedingly difficult to vet applicants and increasing the risk of housing unsuitable tenants. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're like, why would a landlord need to accept an ITIN? What is an ITIN for? An ITIN is so that an illegal alien can pay taxes. Okay, so the only people using an ITIN are illegal aliens. So what they're saying here is that landlords have to rent to illegal aliens, period. That is what that means, okay? The other thing they're saying here is that it prohibits denying rental applications based on pending eviction action. So you have a pending eviction case in court right now for non-payment of rent, and you are, out looking for another place to rent, and a landlord can't deny you. But you've already proven that you can't pay rent to your current landlord. So why exactly would I want to rent to you? Okay, you're in court for an eviction right now. That's idiotic, and denying landlords the ability to do that, the only thing that does is it hurts us landlords. The bill places more burdens on landlords and limits their ability to respond to tenant abandonment. If a tenant abandons the lease, the landlord must attempt to rent the dwelling at market value. Failure to do so results in immediate termination of the rental agreement, absolving the tenant of rent liability. So you have to, it says here that the landlord must attempt to rent the dwelling at market value. Either that or the tenant doesn't owe you anything. So basically what they're saying, they're giving a tenant a way out of having to pay the money that they owe by abandoning their lease early. Okay? Now, part of the reason that we have these leases in place, for whatever time period it is, be it 12 months, 24 months, whatever, right, is so that the tenant doesn't abandon the lease early. It gives them a disincentive, because then they would end up with a debt owed to the landlord, right? And so that gives us kind of peace of mind, saying, okay, we at least have this person in there for 12 months who's going to be paying the rent. But now you're giving the tenant, basically what you're saying is your lease means nothing, okay? And how many times have I talked about how, like things where what you write into your lease are overridden by the government passing some stupid law. So the agreement that originally was between you and the tenant, now the government has stepped in between the two of you, right? And said, hey, your lease does not matter, and we're the ones, the government is the one who makes the decision on what's going on over here. So you know what? Basically, they've destroyed our contracts, okay, and made it so that they're useless. But let me get into the last final thing here. It says the bill allows non-resident tenant organizing groups access to apartment buildings, presenting potential safety concerns for residents and staff. This is particularly concerning after a Brooklyn Park apartment complex caretaker was murdered in February. So basically, right now there's these tenant groups, right? And they're calling themselves tenant unions, right? And I have a very negative view of these tenant unions, because what they do is they band all the people in like an apartment building together. So if you have 100 units, right, they try to get as many people to join this union as possible, and then they'll all do a rent strike against the landlord at the same time. So even if you have one person in there, or maybe a few people in there who have legitimate grievances against the landlord, maybe for like not doing repairs or whatever, right, then all of the tenants in the building will stop paying rent and try to screw the landlord and force their hand into getting something done, right? And so the big problem with this is that, one, it takes away individual, the landlord speaking with each tenant as an individual. The landlord can't do that anymore. The landlord has to speak with tenant organizing leaders, etc., right, in order to get anything done. And these people, they will act like they own the property and force the landlord's hand, or they will hold their rent back, right? So in a fair world, the landlord would be able to say, okay, well, all of you are not paying your rent, so I'm going to evict you all. But because of the laws that these cities have passed, they said, well, that is actually retaliation and you can't do that. So somebody withholding rent from you and then you evicting them is retaliation. That's because you see what the problem is, right? So you have to allow these tenant union people up into your building. If you have any common areas, be it a conference room or a staircase even, these people are allowed up in your building whenever they want, according to this law they're trying to pass in Minnesota. So you see what the problem is that a lot of landlords are going to have with it. These people have, they don't have a lease at your building, they have no right to be there, but they are up in your building trying to get the tenants to work against you. Yeah, big problem, big problem. Anyway, I'll put a link to the article in the description down below. Let me know what you think of these points that I just brought up.